came upon a doorway that had been boarded up.
And by that time, of course, they had seen so many horrific things, they had no idea what they were going to discover behind the doors of this room. And when they broke it down, what they discovered was that it was a room that was kept in a state of perfect, pristine preservation. And that turned out to be the room of Ed's mother.
The bed was made. There was a table, night table. Had a Bible on it. The room was very dusty, musty. The wallpaper was sort of a rose-tinted thing, but it was all kind of discolored. And that was his shrine to his mother.
After his arrest, Ed Gein underwent a month-long court-ordered psychological evaluation. It was here that a picture began to emerge of life behind closed doors on the Plainfield farm, and Ed Gein's descent into madness. Born in 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Edward Theodore Gein was the son of an alcoholic grocery store owner and a strong-willed, God-fearing housewife. When he was 8, his mother Augusta insisted that the family leave their La Crosse home.
One reason, apparently, she insisted that the family move from La Crosse was because, in her mind, you know, it was like Sodom and Gomorrah.
With the proceeds from the sale of their grocery store, the Gein family settled onto a 200-acre farm in Plainfield. Isolated, the family dynamic grew stranger and stranger.
Mr. Gein had a very strange relationship with his mother. It was a love-hate relationship. He listened to her and worshiped her and followed her very closely.
She was religiously devout, if not fanatical woman. Very, very domineering, very, very strong-willed. I mean, she completely dominated her husband, as well as her 2 sons, Gein and his brother Henry.
Augusta would preach a lot out of the book of Revelations that said that women were whores, women were tramps, women were definitely evil beings out to, you know, hurt people.
The Gein household really became a sort of breeding ground for psychopathology. You know, you have these 4 people stuck together, completely under the sway of this woman. So it really becomes an incubation place for madness.
Gein attended school until the age of 14. An unremarkable student, his IQ would later be tested as average.
And when he finished school at approximately 7th grade, he just went home then and worked on the farm there. So he did not have contact with the outside world, shall we say, to any extent.
In 1940, when Ed was 34, his father died of a heart attack. Now it was just Ed, mother, and older brother Henry.
I think Henry was probably a genteel man who worked hard on the farm and tried to please his mother as well. But he wasn't Ed. He had his own ideas of how his life should be led.
In May 1944, Henry and Ed found themselves battling a brush fire on their property. According to Ed, the fire got out of control and he lost sight of his brother. He went for the police, and though he told them he didn't know where Henry was, he was able to lead them straight to his brother's dead body.
I've heard rumors that there were bruises on Henry's head that weren't ever explained away. But at the time, it was such a big tragedy for the family, it just became, you know, well, they've already been through enough.
Ed and Mother were now alone, but their union would be short-lived. Just months after burying her son Henry, Augusta suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed.
When Mother became ill, had a stroke, and was paralyzed, he cared for her very closely and literally, seemingly worshiped the ground she walked on.
Sometime in 1945, Augusta Gein suffered another stroke. She died that December, a devastating blow to her 39-year-old son.
His mother had completely undermined his manhood in every way. And at her funeral, he was reacting like a little schoolboy who had just lost his mommy, you know, and just crying hysterically.
Everything that he knew in the world seemingly was gone. That was his one link with sanity that was remaining at that point.
Until 1945, Ed Gein's world had been entirely defined by his deeply religious and domineering mother. Her death that December left him for the first time on his own. Living alone in an isolated farmhouse outside Plainfield, Wisconsin, the 39-year-old earned money by helping the townspeople with odd jobs or working on threshing crews.
From the time I was pretty small, Eddie Gein was always just, you know, part of the crew. From where our farm was, he was about 2.5 miles away is all. And we'd get in the car and go over and see Eddie. We'd pull into his yard, and I can still remember doing that. And Eddie would always come out and talk to us in the yard. So we never was in his house or anything like that.
He was not the, you know, the village idiot. That's for sure. The housewives in town, they would trust him. You know, can you fix this? I got a door that squeaks at, or, you know, can you fix the hinge on my door? Sure, I come over.
He was a hard worker. When you paid him $1, you had $1.50 worth of work out of him. I mean, he didn't slack off. He wouldn't screw anything up. I think that everybody treated him, even though he was maybe a little, what you would think, a little different, but Eddie was Eddie.
Oftentimes, when the threshing crews broke for lunch, the women would provide them with meals.
When you listen now, the women that would talk about it, they felt kind of funny when Ed would look at them. He would give off kind of a funny, it made him uncomfortable the way he would stare at them.
Something about his eyes that bothered me. I didn't feel like he was a person I would... Strange.
Gein had a reputation around town as odd, yet harmless. Behind closed doors, however, he struggled to cope with life after Mother. Psychiatrists who interviewed Gein concluded that during the years after his mother's death, his psychological problems crossed the line into psychosis.
Mr. Gein's mother's death affected him tremendously. He had no other person to communicate with or talk with. And consequently, he just turned to his inner fantasies, his other interests, and found that without Mother, he didn't know what he was going to be doing.
He would come home to this empty, decaying farmhouse. Again, that was without electricity, that was without indoor plumbing. He was completely isolated.
Gein's mother had left him terrified of human contact, of women in particular. His loneliness, however, drove him to seek his own perverse sort of companionship. At some point, Gein said, he began to make nighttime raids on local cemeteries.
Ed was a reader of the obituaries. He was fascinated by who had just passed away.
Ed would find out when the service was going to be, where the burial was going to be, and as quickly as he could get there in the dark of night, he would go and open that grave and get that body.
Mr. Gein substituted seemingly dead bodies for the activities that he had with his live mother before. If Mother was gone, he needed someone who literally could take her place.
Gein took these desires to ghoulish extremes. Though it remains a mystery if he ever engaged in either sex with the corpses or cannibalism, some of the discoveries police would later make defied comprehension.
There was what the police called a mammary vest, the upper torso of a woman that Gein had taken from the body and preserved and attached straps to. And then there were leggings that had been made from the skin of a woman's legs.
And at times, It was reported that he would sometimes walk around with this mammary vest that he had managed to make from female anatomy, and he would attach it to his body.
And apparently also sometimes take one of the female genitals that he had removed from a corpse and stick those on himself as well and pretend to be a woman.
Eventually, however, violating the dead was not enough to satisfy Gein's morbid urges. It was around this time that he began patronizing Hogan's Tavern, a local watering hole owned by the bawdy, tough-talking Mary Hogan.
That was one bar that hunters would, after you hunt long all day, you generally stop and have a soda pop. And I recall she was very huge and very jovial and joked a lot. Her nickname was Bloody Mary.
Mary Hogan was indeed a dirty talker. She spoke in profanity like a truck driver or a sailor or whatnot.
I think when Ed Gein saw Mary Hogan, he saw some kind of grotesque, dark mirror image of his mother.
On the afternoon of December 8th, 1954, a local farmer stopped into Hogan's Tavern to pick up some ice cream for his daughter.
He goes into the bar, and he knew immediately that something was wrong. There was blood all over the floor, and there was money on the floor, and he just turned around and beat it out of there.
Mary Hogan was nowhere to be found.
When Mary Hogan turned up missing, there was talk about, they said they felt she'd been murdered, and she just was missing, and they just could not find her to go to heck for it.
Police explored what few leads they had. Ed Gein was never questioned. No one considered him a suspect. It was too far-fetched to imagine that the quiet, hard-working bachelor could possibly be a killer.
I can still remember somebody said, well, I wonder where Mary Hogan is. Well, he said, she's over by my place. He said, I got her over there. And everybody said, yeah, Eddie, you got her. Yeah, we know Eddie, yeah.
As the leads petered out, it started to look like Mary Hogan's disappearance would remain unsolved. Until the night of November 16th, 1957, when police found her face in a paper bag in Ed Gein's kitchen.
Maybe he felt he wanted to incorporate her into his home, and this was his way of bringing home a bride. But he brought her home as a corpse.
As 1957 drew to a close, the people of Plainfield, Wisconsin were still reeling from the nightmare visited on their town. Ed Gein had been charged with the murder of hardware store owner Bernice Warden. But the discovery of his many other hideous offenses had brought instant infamy to Plainfield, along with a horde of reporters from around the world.
This was the crime of the country at this particular November in 1957. And it just brought in basically the Western world's press.
Had you ever been in the man's house? No, sir. Never been in there. I'd like to talk now. Your name?
As the incident wore on and it became so much a front page issue that lots and lots of people were saying, when can it just die down? When can it go away?
It was disturbing to the population. We didn't really appreciate all of the media attention.
I was stopped on the street once by a reporter from England, but I just said that I had nothing to say and no comments to make, and walked on.
Outside of Plainfield, a different kind of response was taking hold.